So back in the Enter the World of Cathay trailer, we saw something we'd never seen before. This spell, which reflected projectiles back at the enemy. It looked awesome and seemed like a nice new spell feature to come to the game. But what exactly can it reflect? Just missiles like arrows and bullets, or cannonballs, artillery fire, magic missiles? Let's find out. So here she is, from the lore of Yin, costs 10 winds of magic, missile mirror, redirects projectiles back towards the firing unit. A range of 200 meters, lasts for 18 seconds, cooldown of 44. Affected units, missile unit. From those words alone, it seems to be just missile infantry. There's also an overcast version where you can extend the range, so you can cast it from 400 meters, which is pretty huge, and extend the duration to 36 seconds. This unit card though, and its affected unit's missile unit, doesn't really tell us if artillery is reflected, or magic missiles, or anything in between. Enter Miao Ying to help us do some testing. You can get this spell with her, and any other Cathay character that has the Yin lorebook. So all we're going to have her do is cast Missile Mirror on a bunch of units, and see who it can reflect and how much damage it does to them. So we're just going to go through a few units, not every unit or anything, just different types of ammo. First off, arrows. Good old arrows from Cossars, as you can see, are being reflected, as one would expect. And it does do a fair amount of damage. You can see they've lost a quarter of their health already. Another volley, nearly down to half health. And of course, the damage a unit does to itself with this is going to be dependent on their armor and their missile strength. As such, Cossars don't have a lot of armor, so they're taking a lot of damage. What about bullets then, from the old Streltsy? Can it be reflected at all? Yes, it can. Missile Mirror works on Streltsy and sends their bullets back into their own faces, which are armor-piercing bullets, so they do hurt, but the Streltsy have a fair bit of armor on at 70, so it's kind of the same amount of damage as the Cossars took. They don't have armor-piercing, the Cossars, but they don't have armor either, so it's kind of evened out with these two units, but pretty effective at doing some good damage to that unit. Okay, good. So now we know that bows, arrows, guns, and bullets can be blocked with Missile Mirror. What about something that's a bit more in the middle, though? Bigger than a bow or a gun, but not quite an artillery. How about Ogre Lead Belchers with their cannons? Well, yep, technically they're a missile unit, so they can be missile mirrored and will get their cannonballs back in their own faces, staggering them into confusion. And it makes them do a fair old bit of damage to themselves. You'll see them go down below half health, and this is only the normal version of Missile Mirror. If I'd used the extended one, which goes on longer, they probably would rout themselves. So what of artillery then? Can catapults or cannons be blocked? Well, yes they can. Catapults like the scrap launcher here, which have a high firing arc, can be blocked, but their missile comes back and mostly misses them, and as you can see, it doesn't really do much damage. Compared to a cannon type artillery like the Iron Blaster that the Ogres have, this has a low firing arc and the cannonball can be blocked and missile mirrored and will go back at them, doing a fair amount of damage. But we do have to remember with artillery that missile mirror doesn't last that long, so you're probably only going to reflect 1 or 2 shots unless you overcast. What about something that's not necessarily a dedicated missile unit though, like a Soul Grinder? Well, they can be missile mirrored too, even though his ranged attack is kinda short ranged and a bit more up close and he can use it as he charges into battle rather than sitting back and using it so much. This poor fella can still be tricked into shooting himself and then getting frustrated, doing a bit of damage to himself but not a ton as he goes. So it seems that all kinds of physical projectiles can be reflected. But what about flames? Because those aren't really a physical projectile. We've got the Flamers and Exalted Flamer for Tzeentch, and then in Warhammer 2 we've got things like the Iron Drakes or the Warp Fire Throwers. Can we make them burn their own faces off? Well, not only can we, but we can make them do some pretty hilarious stuff. They will burn themselves with their own flames, and as you can see by the damage, they've nearly wiped themselves out. And with a second volley, they will indeed wipe themselves out. And what's funny there, if you notice, that after the first volley, they gave themselves an extra weakness to fire and reduced their own armor, further making it easier to kill them. Absolute clown flamers. So if you bring flamers versus Cathay, you better be careful. What about other non-physical types of missile attack, like the pink horrors kind of little energy balls? Well, obviously from the trailer we saw them get missile mirrored, so that's a no-brainer. Along with the blue horrors, those little kind of missiles can be reflected. So what then of Lords and magic missiles? Kairos here, he's got Blue Fire of Tzeentch, which is a magic missile, and it cannot be blocked from him. Let me explain. Kairos here, when you try to use the spell Missile Mirror on him, it comes up and reads these words: "Unit is not a missile one." Okay, so Kairos is a melee unit technically, he doesn't have a missile attack, but at the same time he kinda does because he has Blue Fire of Tzeentch, which is a ranged attack magic spell. So that got me wondering, can other units that can cast that spell be allowed to cast it? Like the Herald of Tzeentch here. He also has the Blue Fire of Tzeentch, and when he casts it, it goes back in his own face because he can be magic mirrored. Why is Kairos allowed to fire it, but the Herald isn't? Because the Herald has a missile attack. He has his own little magic balls like the pink horrors that he'll hurl at the enemy. He has a ranged attack alongside his magic spells. So he is not allowed to use Blue Fire of Tzeentch, the same spell that Kairos is allowed to use, because he's limited by the fact that he has a missile attack. So this confirmed my theory that as long as a unit has some kind of missile attack, as in they have the stats for ammunition range and missile strength, they can be blocked by Missile Mirror, including Exalted Plague Bearers, who aren't really a missile unit, they've only got 2 ammo, but they can be missile mirrored and have that ammo sent back at them. So even though they're not necessarily a missile unit, they are technically classed as one because they have a missile attack. Which is why units like Kairos, the Lord of Change, and the Cultist of Tzeentch all can avoid being missile mirrored because they don't have those 3 stats: ammunition, range, and missile strength. They're classed as melee units technically because they don't have a ranged attack on their stats, so even using a fireball, that is a ranged attack, but not really because this boy doesn't have any missile stats. Look how smug he is about it, cheeky bastard. So even though Kairos isn't really a melee unit, he's kind of more of a caster, stay out the way most of the time, can go into melee if he needs to kind of lord, he cannot be blocked by Missile Mirror. So I thought that was just a quite interesting finding, because you might think that magic missiles would all be blockable by Missile Mirror, and they can, if the Lord has a ranged attack. So the other question to ask here is, where is it going to be really useful to use that Missile Mirror? 10 Winds of Magic isn't cheap by any means, so is it worth it to take half health of cheap Kossars? We could say it's definitely worth it to take the entirety of their health off of Flamers, so that's a good use, that's good value for money. 10 Winds of Magic for entirely dead Flamers that cost like $850, that is some bang for your buck. And then there's the question of artillery with high fire arc units that kind of seem to miss themselves, so don't really actually do any damage. Things like mortars and that might not hurt themselves when they get reflected, whereas cannons seem to do a lot of damage to themselves. So maybe it's best to not use that spell on high firing arc units because it doesn't really reflect any damage back at them, and save it for the low firing arc units. And if you are going to cast it on artillery, you may want to overcast it to make it last longer so that the artillery gets more volleys off. But then there's the question of, in multiplayer, if somebody sees that their unit has been missile mirrored, they're going to stop firing, and thus the spell will kind of be wasted. So you're going to have to be a little bit sneaky about it. The overcast version might be a waste in multiplayer. We'll have to see. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the future.